Hello everybody, I'm Kevin Shea, technical trainer from Emerson Swan, and welcome back to our remote located technical training center where we're going to continue in our series of training with the new HTP Elite Ultra boiler. Today we're going to be looking at the control. So in a prior video we reviewed the quick access guide, which was a quick way to commission the boiler, give it the most basic information the boiler needs to be able to run efficiently and safely. However, the control has many more functions, of course, depending on application, which ones will be used, which ones won't. We're going to dig further into this menu and look at these different items, clarify them, and hopefully make this experience with this boiler as easy as possible. The control on the Elite Ultra is the same control throughout the entire boiler line, be it operating a combi boiler or a heat-only application. It's the same control. When the boiler is purchased, that boiler will be pre-programmed and defaulted for the appropriate boiler, whether it's a combi or a heat-only. In the future, should that control need to be replaced, there are parameters in the control menu that you would go ahead and tell that control exactly what it is attached to now. Before we dig into the actual menu items, I think the first thing we should do is become acquainted with the actual control panel. The symbols, the buttons, what they mean, what they do. So what I'd like to do is start right here on the control panel. We can move left to right. The first thing we see is a plus and minus button with a hot water faucet symbol. If this were a combi boiler, this is our domestic hot water control. We can raise or lower the output temperature of the hot water by pressing the plus or the minus button. In all boilers, it also becomes the access to the control, the access to whether it be the quick access menu or the full menu. We would press the plus and minus button simultaneously, as indicated by the parentheses with the wrench indicating service. The next button that we look at is the automatic button. The automatic button is in relation to the outdoor reset strategy. If you've tied an outdoor sensor to the boiler, then all we have to do is simply press the auto button and the outdoor strategy is engaged. Now, of course, we have to program minimum and maximum settings, and we'll get into that a little further. But the auto button, if you press it once, it will engage the outdoor reset function. If we press it again, we'll disengage and go back to set point operation. The auto button, however, is multifunctional in the fact that it can initiate a purge function. So if we depress the auto button for approximately 5 seconds, we can engage a purge cycle. That will shut the burner off and keep the boiler pump running, and if it's attached to other pumps, it'll keep those pumps running to allow the system to be purged out. That's the 6-minute purge. If we do not need a full 6 minutes, of course, we can hit the auto button and go out of the purge function. But what we always have to make sure is that we look at the control display itself. If you see the auto word displayed, that indicates that the outdoor reset strategy is engaged. If you do not want the outdoor reset strategy engaged, you'll have to hit the auto button again. The next button that we look at would be the comfort button. In a boiler-only application, the comfort button does absolutely nothing. I have a boiler only here. You press the button, nothing happens. However, if this was a combi boiler, the comfort button in essence engages a low limit function. It maintains a temperature in the secondary heat exchanger or the plate exchanger for domestic hot water production. The next button is the on and off button. Obviously, When it's backlit, there's power to it. If we shut the power off, okay, let's turn that back on. And as we move left to right, the next button we see is the Wi-Fi button. Another video that you can access for that, but we'll move on. And the next button that we see is the reset button. The reset button, of course, if the boiler or burner should have a lockout, a safety lockout, and need to be reset, that is where we're going to go and do that. The letter R in reset will actually backlight red and indicate that service or maintenance is required. The reset button is multifaceted, however, it does a second function. It's a quick access to our test mode. Test mode is for doing our combustion analysis and or gas valve adjustments. So if we depress the reset button for approximately 10 seconds, we will see the word test. The burner will fire, and currently, to know where we are, we can see the central heat icon, which would let us know that we are on central heat high fire. If we hit the plus button, we now notice the domestic hot water faucet icon. This tells us that we are in high fire for domestic hot water. If we hit the minus button and go down 2 steps, we will see the domestic hot water faucet icon and the radiator icon. This indicates that we're in low fire. Low fire is shared by both DHW and CH. So that is how we are going to get into our test mode. And if we're satisfied with our readings and or we're completed our adjustments, we can go ahead, hit the reset button, and that will put us back into our run mode. Okay, the last 2 buttons on the right are the plus and minus buttons here on the central heating side, as indicated by the radiator icon. Now, this is going to function in a couple of different ways, and it depends on what mode we're in. In other words, if I'm in a set point operation or outdoor reset. So currently, well, let me put it back. Currently, I am in set point operation. So by hitting either one of the plus or minus button on the right side, it'll tell me what my actual set point temperature is. And in this particular case, the set point temperature is 156. While it's blinking, I have the ability to raise or lower that set point temperature, and this is a permanent change. So perhaps I want to set it for 160, and it will stay at 160, and that will be my set point operation. Now, if we're utilizing outdoor reset strategy, it's going to function a tiny bit different. So first, let me put it into outdoor reset mode, and of course I need to give it a minute for the control to make the calculations between the outside temperature, et cetera, to create its target temperature. So at this point, hopefully I've given it enough time, and there we go, now it's recalculated. It's showing the target temperature of 138, and let's just say that wasn't enough to raise my thermostat, so I want to raise it again. So it will blink. And now I'm going to do a parallel shift of my outdoor reset curve by 5 degrees. At this point, that's a permanent change in the outdoor reset strategy. So I just parallel shifted by 5 degrees. So of course that's going to change my target temperature, and in this case, hopefully, we will satisfy the thermostat. So again, these functions will depend on whether we're functioning in the set point mode or if we're functioning in outdoor reset mode. So at this point, we're going to dig into the install manual. If we will be on page 64, so if you'd be kind enough in the install manual to turn to page 64, we'll begin to dig into this control menu. When we were discussing the temperatures on the central heat, we were discussing set point operation. And I think just for clarification, set point is not a limit. Set point is an operating parameter. The boiler has a built-in limit. The limit is 190 degrees. At 190 degrees, the burner will shut off, the circulated pump will stay running. If it exceeds 190 degrees, if for any crazy reason the burner is running away, there will be a hard lockout at 210 degrees. Somebody will have to go and rectify the situation and do a manual reset if the boiler temperature had got that far. Now, set point temperature. The cutoff, the burner off cycle is going to vary based on how long the burner has been running since flame had been established. The theory is to eliminate or minimize short cycling. So in other words, the cutoff point is going to vary based on how long the burner is running, but it will never exceed 7 degrees above set point. So it's important to understand the difference between set point, limit, and lockout. I hope that has made it a little clearer. Okay, before we move on, I think it's important that we just review the display icons. The icons are the boiler's method of communicating, whether it be like your engine diagnostic light coming on, letting you know that service or something needs to be done, or the status of the vehicle. The same thing. These icons are going to tell us things such as the boiler status and temperatures, the technical assistance required. The next one will be whether or not we have detected a flame. Quick glance at the display, we can see what the boiler is letting us know. In this case, it's telling me my flame is been proven. It's on low fire. It's 145 degrees. We're in outdoor reset strategy. There is a central heat call on zone 1. We're about halfway on our temperature to our set point in that we are utilizing an outdoor reset strategy. So that's a quick synopsis and lets me know what the boiler is doing at the moment. So good thing to review. Again, that would be found on page 59. Okay, so let's get into this control. If you would all be kind enough to go to page 64. If we were going to be programming this boiler, we start on page 64. On 64, we have our boiler control menu structure. And of course, all the way to the left here, we have our access codes. This is our quick access. This is our, if we looked at it as minimum required settings, these are the minimum required settings that we need to address. Not every single one, but of course, most of them. Now, when I refer to minimum, the maximum amount of settings would be found in the following pages and can be accessed through the complete menu. Now, let's clarify that, and we can start with the quick access codes. Now, this will be just a fast review. We've already gone through this in the ELU commissioning control section, but just in quick review, the PCB, direct access to boiler parameters. ERR is our error or fault codes. Complete menu gives us access to the entire menu, every function. The next would be DHW, the minimum DHW settings. CH1 would be our zone 1 settings. CH2 would be our zone 2 settings. Now, I didn't refer to this in the original video. However, central heat 2 heating, you do have 2 inputs and you have the ability to have 2 heating temperature zones. Now, of course, just briefly, it will always shoot for the highest temperature, so whatever your sub-temperature zone is, make sure you have some type of mixing. Now, the next one would be CH3. That is currently not used in our control strategy. That will be for future control functions. And then last but not least, the mode tells us whether it's a DHW, CH and DHW, or CH only boiler. So that would be the quick access. Now let's take a look at the menu structure. This is the menu that's going to give us access to the entire to all of the functions. So if you notice as we go along, each section is denoted by a prefix number. So if you notice, the number 2 here refers to all of the boiler parameters. So 2, 0, and then some other numbers will be referring to general settings. 2, 1, and in this case, if I look to my right, it's 2, 1 through 2, 6 is free parameters. So all of the 2s are in relation to your boiler parameters. If you notice as we go along, the next segment is zone 1. So central heat zone 1 parameters as denoted by the prefix number 4. So all of the number 4s will be in relation to zone 1 or central heat parameters. As we go down, zone 2 denoted by prefix number 5, zone 3, which is not being used, however, prefix 6. And then last but not least, we have service parameters, which give us things like run times, ignition cycles, etc., etc. Those are denoted by the number 8. So to clarify, if I go into the first set of parameters, and we go to the boiler parameters are listed in the 200 series. I go over to my page 65 and I see here 2.0 is correct, 2.0 general, and we go down 200, 210, 211, 212, and each function, of course, in some cases, some of them say we're not using this function. It could be for future use. And in some cases, they'll be addressing either an application we're using or maybe it's denoting a function that we might not be using, depending, of course, on application. So what we'll have to do is kind of break out these segments individually and talk about the key functions and how they interrelate to allow your boiler to run safely and efficiently. So let's go back and actually do a real life example here if we can. So let's go back to the quick access. So I want to program my boiler. I want to get it up and running. I'm going to go to my quick access, hit the minimum amount of adjustments or checks. Sometimes I don't have to check them, but I should definitely, adjust them, but I should definitely be checking them. So in this case, let's take a look at our zone 1 or CH1 heating. So in our quick access guide again, it gives us these 4 parameters that we need to check. 402, 420, 425, and 426. So basically, it's just asking us, so again, the 400 series, which correlates with zone 1 temperature. So what they're asking us is whether or not we're operating a high temperature, low temperature, what is our set point, and then our maximum and minimum if we were to utilize the outdoor strategy. Well, that's fine, and that's all we need. And that will get us up and running, and we're good. However, let's take a look at the central heat parameters in the full menu because let's just say, for an example, we did the installation in a nursing home. Well, most factory default warm weather shutdowns are preset to 68 degrees. And anybody that knows working in nursing homes, that can be a little aggressive. We might want to adjust that to 74 degrees before we shut the heat off at the nursing home. So, because the quick access didn't address warm weather shutdown, it addressed the minimum requirements that we needed, then we'll go into our regular settings, our full menu, I should say, and then we look down here and we have the ability to go into a function to change the outdoor reset or warm weather shutdown temperature. So, again, let's just do this. Again, to access our menu, we hit, of course, as the parenthesized service wrench, we hit simultaneously the plus and minus buttons, and we have to enter our code to access the control. So we go up to, 234 is the access code. And when we get to 234, we hit OK. And of course, that brings us into our quick access. And our quick access, I go to menu. Well, let me go show you first the central heat 1. We hit OK. Remember, there'll be 4. The 402, the 420, 425, and 426. Now again, this would be minimum temperature for outdoor reset. That would be maximum temperature, whether or not we're in a high temp or low temp system. And then last but not least, the set point temperature. But nowhere in those 4 settings does it allow us to change warm weather shutdown temperature. So we're going to have to enter into our full menu and get to that item and make the adjustment. So of course we know that we would be in the 400 series, but to access the full menu, we have to go back to menu. Oop. And there's my menu. Hit OK. And the first number that we're going to enter into, now the way I'm finding this is by going into the 400 series zone 1 parameters. And here it says summer winter changeover. And the temperature threshold is adjusted by function 411. So we go first to 4, okay. That will move us to the next number. 1, okay, and 1, okay. So we see the factory default is 68 degrees for our warm weather shutdown. And remember, we're in the nursing home, so we wanted to bump that up. This is subjective. I mentioned 74, maybe it's 75. And we hit OK, and that just adjusted our warm weather shutdown from the factory default using the full menu. So it was, of course, one of those items that was not in the quick access. The back button will bring us back into our menu. We hit the back button again, and we're in our run. So there is one example of a quick relation between the quick access and then accessing the full menu to just make that one tweak that we needed at the nursing home. So again, 99% of our applications with these in residential applications for sure, the 68 degree warm weather shutdown default is going to be fine. However, we do have the ability to go in and fine tune. So in essence, the quick access, that's tuning in our boiler, but sometimes we need to fine tune it a little bit, and that fine tuning can be done, of course, through the full menu. Okay, I'd like to make a clarification, an observation here. There are some functions when we get into the full menu that are being reserved for future applications, and some items that are not meant to be adjustable for the technician. These are settings that are made by the factory. So for one example that I like to show you is when we're going down in the boiler parameters, the settings, if we look down at function 229, I'm on page 65. It says set boiler heating power from 0 to 200. And you wonder, what am I setting? What is this boiler power? But before you go too far, you can access again or look at the quick access codes and understand that there are several items that will not be active or will be activated in the future. So if I go to 229, I double check up here on PCB, and it sure enough lets me know 228, 229, and 230 are not active. So at that point, I really don't need to bother with figuring out what it means because it's not an active function. It's not a function that I need to adjust. So there are a handful of functions that are left available. So as you're going along, if you find something that gets a little confusing, don't forget to look back at that quick access and see if it's one of the vacant functions. Okay, as we consider the control in the Elite Ultra, this control represents the latest technology in the heating market today. It accommodates a multiple of applications, whether they be, you know, your typical standard thermostat operated zone, or maybe a zone that's operated by sensors, fixed temperature sensors, adjustable. The bottom line is occasionally a technician will open up a manual and look at all the functionality, look at the 9 pages of functions and think that the boiler is very complicated. I don't like to use the word complicated. What I like to say is the boiler is capable. It it's capable of being applied to several different applications. Again, in probably 98% of your residential applications, the quick access guide and the functions listed there are going to be all that you need to set the system up to make it run safely and reliably. You might find some strategies in Europe that are used a little bit more than in the United States, and vice versa. And the bottom line is, I don't care if you come from Romania or Rochester, New York. The control can accommodate whatever application you want to throw at it. So I tell people that it's more important to know your application than you tell the control what it needs to do. Instead of reading 9 pages of control functions and trying to figure out what the boiler is trying to tell you. It's the other way around. So again, I don't find it complicated. It's capable. So we're going to dig into a couple of more of these, but I could actually show you one quick example here before we move on. And I'm on page 67, and I'm on the 400 series, the zone 1 temperature settings. The very first 2 settings they ask you to adjust or refer to here is temperature day and temperature night. Now, typically we're using thermostats, adjustable thermostats, whether it's programmable or we're physically adjusting the temperatures. Well, in the thermostat application, those 2 functions, they don't mean anything. It's if you're tying the boiler to a sensor, a room sensor or a floor sensor or something like that. And then you have to tell the boiler what temperatures you want during the day and what temperatures you want during the night. Now, these applications may be in a warehouse or some commercial application where we don't necessarily want the occupants to be adjusting the thermostats up or down, and that comfort range can be adjusted at the boiler itself by the technicians. So again, not complicated, it's capable. So let's dig into this a little bit further. I think what we're going to go into next is we'll take a look at the error codes. To access the error codes, again, we can look here on page 64 through our quick access. So we're going to hit the plus and minus on the service wrench. Enter 234 for our access code. Hit OK, and then move to error, and we hit OK. Now, when we wait a minute, it will tell us what the latest fault was. So this was the one that just happened most recently. And in this particular case, it's telling us that the 9th error code is 203. So what I would do to find out what 203 is, go into my install manual and find the error code section here. I'm on page 80. And on page 80, we start to go through and we look for error 203, and I find it over on page 81. And it says that the storage temperature probe circuit was open or short-circuited. And basically all that was is I told the controller earlier in another demonstration that the indirect was going to be operated by a sensor. Well, obviously there's no sensor. So as soon as we engaged to go into run mode, the control immediately recognized there was no sensor and went into an error code. So we can navigate through the different codes, error 8, 7, 6, 5, all the way back down to the first error, error number 1, and it's showing error 1 is 5P6. So again, I go to my error code and I look for, so I find 5P6 on page 83, and it lets me know that the third and fourth ignition had failed. Actually, that was a fault that I put in. Of course, when you first fire off and commission a boiler, you want to start it with the gas valve off to make sure that the safety device will shut it off. So these error codes, they can be used in a couple of different ways. Number one, and the most obvious, is when the boiler is experiencing an error condition. Of course, when you come in as the technician, I can see exactly what that error is and be able to address it immediately. The other thing is maybe I'm there on service work or another call and I access the error codes and I see a pattern. You know, perhaps there are several overheating lockouts. Well, obviously, just resetting an overheat and letting it run doesn't mean it's fixed. There was something going on. So we'd be wanting to look at things like temperature sensors, boiler circulation, the circulator pump itself, things like that. So we can look at the error history, look for trends. We can, in essence, have a conversation with the boiler, and it will continue to scroll the last 10 fault codes for you. The error codes do not receive a date and time stamp on the boiler through the boiler control. So therefore they won't be displayed through the control. However, we do have the Wi-Fi option. If your boiler is online, then all of your error codes will be date and time stamped, and that information can be accessed through the wireless app on your smartphone. So let's do a quick review of where we've been, and what I'm referring to again is the quick access. I'm on page 64. And again, just a quick review. PCB, direct access to the parameters. Those are the boiler parameters. That's just letting the boiler again know whether I'm tied to an indirect or whether the indirect has a sensor or an aquastat. Just some of the most basic parameters. We move to the next block, which is the error codes. We just reviewed that. Of course, that's going to come in handy. The complete menu is full access to every single function item in the manual. Next, DHW in the quick access is the most basic functions that the boiler needs to know to start it up. Central 1 heating, that's our zone 1 temperatures. Now, as we look a little further, we have CH1, CH2, and CH3. If I may make reference to that, CH1 is typically zone 1, and in a logical sequence, it would typically be your highest temperature zone should you have a multiple temperature system. So maybe zone 1 would be the fin 2 baseboard zones. When we go down to CH2, CH2 is a second temperature zone, typically reserved for a sub-temperature. So zone 1 logically will be our highest temperature zone. Zone 2 will be lower than zone 1. The control logic will always shoot for the highest temperature calling. So again, make sure that if you are using CH2 as a sub-temperature zone, that zone needs to be protected by injection or mixing or some way to reduce the output temperature. The next item is CH3. That is a function that's currently not utilized. However, in the future, there will be functionality to central heat 3. The next thing you have here is the mode. And mode is simply telling the boiler whether it's a domestic hot water only boiler, a central heat only boiler, or a heat and hot water boiler. Again, accessing the most minimum amount of functions that would be required to set that system off in a safe and efficient manner. Again, I referred to it earlier as this is kind of tuning in the boiler, and then when we get into the full menu, this is the fine tuning of the boiler. And remember, there are functions that will be used, functions that won't be used. It's not complex, it's capable. That concludes this segment of the control of the HTP ELU Ultra boiler utilizing the Extra Tech heat exchanger. I hope this was helpful. Please visit www.emersonswan.com, where you'll find all of our technical resources, other videos, training videos, and certainly links to all of our manufacturers. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our next video.